All right, so as someone who identifies as more of an introvert than most, the one thing that I've consistently noticed about myself, and I've noticed this in a lot of other people as well, the thing I struggle with most when it comes to conversations, like the one thing that I absolutely suck at, is the small talk phase. So in my experience, most introverts are like this. And I mean, if you're watching this video, I'm willing to bet that you're probably an introvert as well. If we're talking to someone that we know and trust, if we're having like a deep conversation with people that we're already familiar with, that conversation could not feel any more effortless. It's the most easy, natural thing in the world. Like when we're talking about something we're passionate about, you cannot shut us up. But the funny thing is, if I were to then introduce someone who, when we're not so close with, someone who we don't know very well, it's like everything changes. We kind of freeze up, and we find ourselves getting stuck in that small talk phase, unable to get out of it. What would happen with me is I'd end up feeling like I needed to suppress myself, or I can't get away with saying the same things I might say around my friends. But that would always end up coming across to the other person like either I'm a really boring bastard or I'm just kind of cold and unfriendly, when the reality is I'm just socially anxious. And you'll be aware of the big misconception around introverts. Like, people think introverts are just bad at conversation, when really that's not the case at all. Like I said, if you put us in a room with people we know and trust, you're not going to be able to shut us up. It's just what we struggle with is the small talk phase and transitioning from those like more shallow topics and subjects into the more deep conversations where we can show off our true personality. But the reason I'm telling you this is because there's this one set of traits that now I've started to develop them in myself. I find it a lot easier to get out of that small talk phase, to get to the more engaging conversations, and more importantly, form those connections with people that I don't know very well. And this method is called the grandpa method. Yeah, you heard me right. It's called the grandpa method. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the 3 traits that most grandpas have, which just make them so easy to spend time with, so easy to have conversations with, which is ultimately what we're trying to emulate with our conversations. And more importantly, how you can use them to make yourself come across as instantly likable. So the first trait, which pretty much all grandpas have, which makes them insanely easy to be around, is it feels like they take all of the pressure off you in conversations. So what exactly do I mean by this? Well, by no pressure, I mean there's no pressure to feel like you've got to do anything different. There's no pressure to change yourself or to try and be funny or interesting in conversations. Like, how certain people you're trying to impress them, so you might start changing aspects of your personality. You don't have to do that around your grandpa. It kind of feels like no matter what you say to them, whether you're coming with a problem or really if you're just there to just chat shit and not really say anything, it feels like their reaction is always going to be the same. They're always just going to be like calm and happy and non-judgmental whenever they're around you. And equally, you're okay not saying anything around them, like having those long drawn out silences that might get kind of awkward around other people. But when it's your grandpa, like, you're comfortable doing that. You feel like you can just unapologetically be you. And what I'm talking about isn't really related to any specific action or behavior they're doing. It's more about like a feeling they're creating for you, like a feeling of non-judgment where you can just be yourself. And this is related to a concept called the law of state transference. So what the law of state transference is it dictates that the mental or emotional state you're in, you end up carrying that into your conversation, and a little bit of that ends up rubbing off on the other person. You're transferring your state of mind to this person. So sometimes without you even realizing, you're constantly broadcasting energy to the other person in conversations through things like your body language, your mood, your tone of voice, even like the micro expressions on your face that you're not even conscious of. You're broadcasting this energy to the other person. And sometimes they don't even realize this, but they can pick up on it very quickly. Like, even before a word comes out of your mouth, they're kind of getting an idea of what kind of person you are just through this energy you're projecting. So I'll give you an example. So Say if you're about to ask out a girl and you're kind of tense and anxious whilst you're speaking to her, you don't know what to say. You're kind of stumbling over your words, like you don't really know what to say. You're broadcasting that nervous and anxious energy to her, and even though you have good intentions, subconsciously for her it feels like, why is he nervous? Is there a reason I should be nervous too? She kind of starts mirroring your energy. It starts to rub off on her. And equally, if you can come at it with the traits of the grandpa that I just mentioned, that sounds kind of funny saying it out loud, but those traits of calmness, of understanding, maybe above all else, the non-judgment, it will almost prompt the other person to feel like they can open up around you, that they can share anything, they could literally tell you anything and you wouldn't really judge them for it. You know, these are the types of traits that make your presence absolutely addicting for the other person. Like, these are strong, charismatic traits. And I think a lot of people will hear this and think, you know, I only feel that way around my grandpa because I've known him all my life. I know he's not going to bully me if I start opening up to him. It's more of a relationship built on trust. But I don't think this is always the case. Like, I've had people who, when I've met them for the first time, their presence is just so warm and charismatic that it kind of feels like I can just share anything. Like, even though I've only known this person in a couple of minutes, their effect on me is that strong that it makes me want to open up and share. So if we can project the right type of energy, then there's nothing stopping us from having this effect on people who we've only known like 5 minutes. So there's a few ways we can go about unlocking this energy. We could start altering our body language, or we could work on speaking softer. These things could work. But what I found a whole lot more effective over the years is visualization. It's almost visualizing myself as this character of the old wise grandpa who always knows what to say, who's always has that like calming effect on people. Literally just imagining in my mind's eye that I'm him, you know, before or even during a conversation, literally just taking a moment to visualize this grandpa in your head, visualize yourself as this character. How would he act? How is he able to make the other person feel understood and not judged? You know, people take the piss out of visualization. Like, they say it's some like woo-woo shit or whatever. But what I find is when you visualize yourself as that character, rather than having to like go through everything one by one, like, is my body language correct? Am I speaking in the right tone of voice? It kind of just prompts you to start acting that way automatically. You don't really have to think about it because you're just embodying this character. You're doing the things that he would do. So the first step is believe that you are the wise old grandpa, that whatever the other person says, you're happy, you're understanding, and you are non-judgmental. So the second highly charismatic traits of grandpas are that they always carry the conversation when you need them to. So you've probably heard the super common advice all over YouTube, in every self-improvement book, that in order to be an interesting person, you first have to be interested. You have to show interest in other people. Everyone loves to talk about themselves, right? It sounds like good advice, and I actually think it is good advice. I'm not disputing that. But if you were to take this at face value and just apply it to every single situation, you can actually risk coming across as a bit intense and a bit weird, and also pretty unlikable. And the simple reason for that is most people are actually not that comfortable sharing about themselves when you've just met them. After like the first 5 to 10 minutes, when they know you're not a murderer, but most people don't really want questions. Like, I know your intentions are probably good, but it can feel like a bit much for the other person. Like, why is this guy trying to find out all this stuff about me? I don't really know them. They can feel backed into a corner. And the other way of looking at it is, this is putting all of the pressure on them to speak, to come up with interesting answers. It's putting a lot of pressure on them. And if you'll go back to the first trait that we talked about, we don't really want to be doing that. We don't want to make them feel like they've got to do all of the work. Think about it like this, like, the reason why so many grandpas are so chill and easy to talk to is because it feels like you could walk up to them and say literally anything. Like, you could say hi, or you could just like spew some random bullshit, whatever was on your mind. Doesn't matter what you say, a conversation is still going to spawn, and probably a really interesting conversation at that. And I know that probably sounds like I've flipped the pressure and now it's on you to carry this conversation and to have something interesting to say. I know that sounds scary, but it's 5 minutes until they feel comfortable sharing about themselves, until they know that we're not a murderer and that we're a cool guy. So I've got a really practical and helpful mindset for this, which is going to make the first 5 to 10 minutes of that conversation feel a lot smoother. And this is to assume that most people just suck at asking questions. So asking questions is actually a skill, and most people are just horrendous at it. Like, most people just ask these really basic questions, and if you were to answer them super literally, the conversation would be over in like one word. I could just say like yes or no, or give some like basic one word answer, and that's it. Like, we've killed off any possible conversation that could happen after that. If someone were to ask your grandpa, like, where are you from? Or a really basic, boring question like that, he's not going to answer with just one word. He's not just going to say London. He's probably going to find a way to tie it to like some really interesting story, or he's going to give like a whole essay's worth of information just in that one answer. He's going to find a way. And that's kind of the gist of what we want to do in response to these questions. We don't need a really interesting story to tell. Like, we don't need to be an encyclopedia and just always have the most interesting answers. But what we can work on is just giving more detail in our answers. So when someone asks you a really basic, generic question like this, or let's say someone asks me, how has my week been? Instead of giving a one-word answer, we want to do this. We want to use the think, feel, do framework. We want to give an opinion, an emotion, and an action. So I could say it's actually been a really good week. That's my opinion. I felt way more energized and motivated than normal. That's an emotion. I woke up earlier this week and was in the gym by 7 a.m. on 4 days, and that is an action. It might sound like I just gave loads of unnecessary detail in my answer. And that's kind of the point. We don't just want to give a one-word answer that's going to kill the conversation completely. We want to give the person lots of information to work with to make it easier for them, so they can choose which direction to take this conversation in. The more information and different directions you give them, the easier it is for them to just pick that up. Like, the more pressure it takes off of them. If you give them a shit ton of info to work with, the chances are that they're going to realize that you are a charismatic person, that you've got a handle on this conversation, and really there's nothing for them to worry about. Because most people, the thing that they fear the most with people they don't know is the conversation's going to die, or it's going to get a bit awkward. If they can see that you're perfectly capable of carrying a conversation, like you've got their back, they're going to feel so much more at ease and comfortable opening up with you. So that's what you got to do. Put the work in for the first 5 to 10 minutes. Give as much detail as possible in your answers, and remember that people just suck at asking questions, and you'll be coasting. So the final and probably the most overlooked and misunderstood trait that makes grandpa so charismatic is they're amazing listeners. So many people on this planet are just fucking horrendous at listening. I encounter this every week. People who just run their mouth all the time, and they think the secret to being likable is just saying all of the right things. When really all of the super communicators, all of the most charismatic people on the planet know that it doesn't actually matter that much what comes out of your mouth if you're not a highly skilled listener. Listening is how you get through to people. Listening is how you make people actually enjoy being around you. But most people have not even spent 10 minutes working on their listening skills. I'm going to explain how you do that. So let me give you some examples of what listening is not. Waiting for your turn to speak. Hearing words, but not even registering them. There's this section in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I don't really remember the names or what chapter this was from, but there's this story about these two businessmen at this party. And one of them just liked to talk and talk and talk, and the other guy was a little bit more quiet and thoughtful. And at the end of the party, one of the guests had this to say about the two guys, and They spoke to both of these guys at separate points in the party. This person said, the first guy, he had me convinced that he was the most interesting person in the room. Like, he talked up all of his achievements. He told me about all the amazing things he'd done with his business, how rich he was. But the second guy made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room, because he didn't talk up all his achievements, and he was actually more interesting in hearing about me and my life. So in that example, the second guy, who was highly skilled at listening, was easily much more charismatic and likable than the first guy. And this is the point I'm making. Like, humans are not dumb animals. We know intuitively what makes a good listener and when someone is actually listening to us, when we're just talking to a fucking brick wall of a human because they're not even paying attention, how that makes us feel. But we still won't give people the common courtesy of learning how to become a better listener, so we don't make them feel like they're a waste of space and we can come across as more likable. So let me give you my highly actionable tip on how to become a better listener. So say you're in a conversation with the other person and they're talking. If at any point during when they're speaking, you're already thinking about what you're going to say, you're already formulating a response in your head of how you're going to respond to something they've said, you're not listening. True listening does not involve thinking about what you're going to say before you actually say it. If you're thinking about that, then you're not actually paying attention to what they're saying. That's just the truth. So really, what you want to do is hear them out fully. Literally empty your mind of all thoughts and just focus intently on what they're saying. And then once you're done, take a few seconds to pause. Take like 5-10 seconds even to pause and come up with a more thoughtful response. And this is a bonus tip, actually, something else that grandpas do. Why do you think it is that everything they say comes across as so wise and profound? Like why is that? A big reason is actually because they just take time to pause before giving their answer. Introverts and shy people, they're worried about hitting an awkward silence. So they'll rush out all of their words. They'll talk really fast just to fill the gap. But truly charismatic people don't do that. They pause, and let's be honest, even if what they end up saying isn't anything that profound, it just has that like dramatic effect to it because they've left that silence. So if you combine these two tips, actually waiting for the other person to finish talking and then using a pause before you give your answer, mate, your charisma is just going to be through the roof. So that is the grandpa method. Those are the 3 traits which make grandpas all over the world extremely charismatic. I hope your grandpa is as charismatic as this and he's not just some grumpy old man, because that would kind of take away from the video slightly. But I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.